Buying a home in San Diego is expensive, which is why the thought of spending thousands of extra dollars for a real estate agent commission just isn't realistic for most people. So there are new rules that just went into effect on August 17th that dictate how you can work with a real estate agent when buying a house. And it's really important that you know all of the rules before deciding to sign a contract with them or even work with a real estate agent in the first place. My name is Dan Parker with the Best Life Home Team, your San Diego real estate resource. And although I am a realtor myself, don't hold that against me, because if you watch my videos before, you know that I give unbiased insights so that you can make the best decisions for you and for your family. The question most people want to know is, what exactly changed? How does this impact you buying a home here in San Diego County? And for anyone that's out there considering buying a house without a realtor, I'll tell you exactly what you need to know. First, let me explain what happened, what these new rules are, and how they came about. So back in March of this year, there was a giant settlement in the real estate industry with the National Association of Realtors versus a ton of homeowners. And essentially, the settlement was over increasing transparency in the real estate industry when it comes to real estate commissions. The settlement really has three pieces, one of which was a giant payout of $413 million, and the other two are very impactful for you as a home buyer. So as far as what you need to know, first, realtors are now prohibited from showing any home to a private client, to anyone looking to buy a house, unless there is a formal, signed buyer representation agreement in place. Now, hold on, because there's a tremendous amount of misinformation out there for this one, and I think you're going to have a lot more rights than you think as a buyer. So no, as a buyer, there's actually no requirement on your end. The requirement is on the real estate agent's end. So you can actually go around this. You can go to an open house. You can go to a listing agent directly and not have to sign any form of buyer representation agreement with an agent in the first place. Those are options. If you do end up signing an agreement, there's not only one agreement that you can sign. You can sign a touring agreement for the specific homes that you want to check out. You can sign a non-exclusive agreement. You can put in all sorts of different timelines on this agreement. There are a lot of different options out there, so don't let anyone tell you that there's only one requirement, only one form, only one way to sign it. There are options. That's why this whole settlement came about in the first place. And the last part of this settlement that you need to know is that sellers, people that want to sell their house, that are selling their house, they're now prohibited from listing a buyer agent compensation amount on the multiple listing services or the MLS. That's a mouthful. Let me just explain exactly what this means. So how this used to work is when I used to list a home for sale up until this point, I would go to the seller and I would say, all right, here is the compensation that I'm requesting. Here's the total commission that I'm asking for, whether it's 3, 4, 5, 6, 10%, doesn't matter what the number is. I would ask for a total amount, and I would tell them up front, certain percentage of this, a cooperating compensation, is going to go towards the buyer's agent. And so as a requirement for me, I have to get a listing agreement signed. There has to be a formal listing agreement for me to have in place to be able to sell someone's house. And it's going to clearly outline the total amount of commission I'm asking for, how much of that is going to mean, how much of that we are earmarking, we're designating for a buyer's agent. So that used to all be negotiated up front. And then we would put that on the multiple listing services that would syndicate to Redfin, Zillow, all those other third-party sites. And that way, the buyer's agent would know upfront before helping someone submit an offer on a house exactly what their compensation would look like. This is why, as a buyer, up until this point, you've never really had to have the conversation with your real estate agent of what their compensation looks like, because they're expecting to get that from the sellers automatically upfront. But now, sellers and listing agents can no longer advertise this compensation on the MLS. They are allowed to offer it. They are allowed to advertise it on their own personal websites. They are allowed to advertise it on their for sale sign. They just cannot put it directly into the multiple listing services or the MLS. Which leads me to the most commonly misunderstood aspects of this, the myths and completely untrue and misrepresented headlines that you're seeing all over the place out there. Myth number one is that a buyer is always going to have to pay a realtor commission out of pocket if they decide to work with a buyer's agent. So you buy $1 million home here in San Diego, you're going to have closing costs, you're going to have your down payment, and you're going to have your realtor commissions. Now, in some rare scenarios, it might actually make sense for you to pay your real estate agent directly. However, in the strong majority of scenarios, that's not what we are expecting. In fact, sellers have never had to offer buyer agent compensation upfront or ever. But they did because they knew it puts them in a strategically advantaged situation when 90% of people are working with real estate agents out there. And this is what we're seeing on the back end with the new rules in place. Every single seller, 100% of the sellers that we've talked to, when we go over this whole situation, we know that most buyers are going to be represented by a real estate agent. So they're willing to negotiate compensation. It's just going to have to come in through the offer as opposed to them offering it directly up front. Myth number 2 is that you always have to sign a representation agreement, even if you're going directly through the listing agent or going directly to the open house. This is a myth. You as a buyer, you aren't required to do anything. First of all, it's on the real estate agents that we have to get a signed representation agreement. However, if we're selling a house, we don't have to get that because we're representing the seller. If we're hosting an open house, even if we're not the listing agent, there's no requirement for us to get anything signed because we are in that situation marketing for the seller, not because we are working for you as the buyer. So if you walk into an open house and someone tells you otherwise, you have to sign this representation agreement. Tell them that's hogwash. That is complete misrepresentation of what's going on and probably a strong lack of understanding by that individual. In fact, send them to this video so they could get better educated on exactly what's going on out there. Myth number 3, I think might surprise you. Myth number 3 is going to be that you can buy or sell a home now without a realtor. And it's a myth because you've always been able to do this. There are for sale by owners. There are services that will offer to sell a house for minimal or very little fees. You've always had the opportunity to go directly to the listing agent to negotiate deals on your behalf. And so this is nothing new. It's more highlighted now with all the headlines and with this settlement in place. And if I'm being honest, it actually might make sense for some people, for some buyers and sellers out there that are experienced, that have done this a bunch of times, that do a lot of research, that are experienced negotiators. Sure, what I do is not rocket science. It might make sense for you to do it all on your own. But here are the best things that you need to know, or at least be aware of before you go down that path as a home buyer. And you can start by just understanding what you're up against and what you could potentially be missing out on. If you're a first-time buyer or you haven't bought in 5, 10, 15 years, consider the difference of working with someone that's done 20 to 30 deals this year alone. Think of their experience, their market knowledge, the negotiation skills, their resources. You might be avoiding some commissions potentially, but what could that actually be costing you? It's also important to note if you're going to do this on your own and buy a house yourself, you're likely going to be working through the listing agent, whether it's a formal dual agency representation or you're actually representing yourself. There are some nuances and some differences there. But either way, just know this listing agent has a fiduciary duty, responsibility to the seller. So it's not likely that you're going to learn much or get much assistance when it comes to negotiations on the price, on repairs, on appraisal. There are multiple opportunities to negotiate throughout the transaction, and that listing agent isn't going to be negotiating on your behalf. But here's the biggest secret, and I think the craziest part of this whole thing, because this is supposed to allow for more transparency throughout the transaction, but just take a look. Just listen in on what I'm saying here. The new listing agreement that a real estate agent has to get signed by a seller prior to listing their house has a specific spot for how much extra compensation they are asking for if they end up working with an unrepresented buyer. And yet this is not something that they have to show up front. They aren't going to show what their listing agent compensation is. They're not going to show or say how much extra commission they are getting if they end up working with an unrepresented buyer. And don't get me wrong, there are reasons as a listing agent, as working with a seller to help sell their house. If you end up working with the buyer as well, and there's not an agent on that other side, it's going to be a lot more work for you. So there probably should be some additional compensation in there. But you as a buyer, just think about the fact that you could either have that compensation go towards someone that's actually representing you, or you can have that go towards the person that's working on the seller's behalf. There's always, maybe not always, I'm going to say 95 to 99% of the time, there is going to be an earmarked commission that is going to that listing agent if they end up working with an unrepresented buyer. If you go directly to the listing agent. So in that scenario, it probably just makes better sense to have someone represent you and have that compensation go to them directly. That is seriously the craziest thing that absolutely nobody is talking about. All right, let me break this all down into 3 main things that you need to know. Number 1, as a buyer, you have options. You can go directly to the listing agent. You can go to open houses on your own without signing any buyer representation agreement. Number 2, if you do end up working with a real estate agent, you should feel confident that compensation is most likely going to come from the seller, from the seller directly, and you're going to know that before you get your offer accepted. If you sign a buyer representation agreement, do it for no more than 3 months, or see if they're just offering some type of touring agreement. There are some other options out there, non-exclusive or touring agreement, just so you can test the waters and feel them out and make sure that you made a good decision and they're meeting your expectations. And number 3, when working with an agent, make sure that they clearly outline what they can do for you. What type of experience do they have? How many transactions have they done this year? What type of compensation are they looking for? Take the time to make sure you're working with someone Not just because they're friendly and they're a good person to talk to, but because they're the best agent for the job. And if you have someone in mind, that's great. If not, myself and my team, we would love to have the opportunity to work with you. You can view our website for more information or reach out. Contact info is down below. And if you just want more information on the San Diego market, check out this playlist right here for my most recent breakdown of what's going on in this local market. Thanks for watching. See you on the next one.